I find myself in a bit of a quandary here because I need to talk about the Chapel Hill shooting, and I don't do treading lightly well. So let me preempt everything I'm about to say by pointing out that in no way am I trying to minimize the tragedy of that incident. I'm going to heavily criticize the shit out of all kinds of ancillary issues that have grown up around it, but I hope to do so without completely losing sight of the fact that at the heart of this is a very real hardship for the families of the victims, for their entire community. I guess when you live in a country with an average of almost 40 murders a day, it's easy to get lost in the statistics and completely lose track of the singular catastrophes. The lives that are ruined and the futures that are stolen by violent crime kind of just drift away in the numbers, and that's probably why, as a culture, we tend to latch on to certain crimes, usually directed by our national media, as representations of the others. By personalizing one murder, we try to put a human face on that statistic and force ourselves to face the horrors of violence. No matter how many homicides take place, once in a while we have to stop as a society, gasp in horror, and ask what the hell is wrong with us. But of course, the media isn't picking the murders that best represent the trends in crime. More often than not, they're picking the ones that are either particularly grisly or the ones that reinforce a larger narrative. And as Machiavellian as that might sound, it's not necessarily immoral. Publicizing a murder often shines a light on some social inequity or some larger societal problem that we might not address if we're not shocked out of our apathy. The problem, then, is in what narrative one is attempting to reinforce. So with all that in mind, let me back up and tell all the people in archive what the hell I'm talking about. Last Tuesday, at an apartment complex in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, 3 students were gunned down by a neighbor in what appears to be an ongoing dispute over a parking space. The victims were Muslim. The assailant was an atheist. There is, according to police and all the evidence that's been released up to the point that I'm recording this, absolutely no reason to believe that the theological leanings of anyone involved had anything whatsoever to do with these murders. By all accounts, this stemmed from the killer's psychotic obsession with parking spaces. A number of his neighbors of various religious and ethnic persuasions reported that the same guy had confronted them about parking, often with a gun visible on his hip. A local towing company had a standing order to ignore calls from this guy. The victims themselves had told their family about their repeated run-ins with him and their fears that he might become violent over this parking thing. The police have publicly stated that they have no evidence at this time that this was anything other than a violent escalation about something as stupid as parking. So why do we all know that the killer was an atheist? Quick, what religion was the Sandy Hook shooter? Any of the headlines read, Catholic man guns down kindergarten? What about the dude that shot up the Dark Knight premiere? Anybody remember the talking heads identifying him as the Presbyterian gunman? I'm relatively sure that no Muslims are listening to the show, but if they were, they'd probably be muttering, "Welcome to our world." And while that's true to some degree, let's be fair, at least there's ample precedent for Muslims killing in the name of Islam. That's a thing that really happens in nonfiction. To my knowledge, there has never in all of human history been a murder in the name of atheism. Now, don't get me wrong. I will freely admit that there's crime in this country against Muslims that is motivated entirely by bigotry, and if I had to guess, I'd say there are atheists perpetrating some of that crime. Of course they are. Because atheism has bigots, just like every other self-selecting group of humans. But let's try to keep things in perspective. America fucks a lot of things up, but one thing Americans almost never do is kill people over religion. There aren't definitive statistics for 2014, but in 2013, according to the FBI, the number of people killed in the U.S. because of their religion was 0. It's extraordinarily rare in this country, even as much as we love killing one another. And yet I've seen multiple editorials like the one in the New Republic talking about how this is it should serve as a wake-up call to atheists. A wake-up call about what? Let's say that all the evidence and investigators and police officers and neighbors are wrong, and this really was about his atheism. The guy just hated religion so much that he had to go out and kill religious people. What lesson is the atheist community supposed to take away from this? That's bad? That rejecting religion doesn't insulate one against bigotry or psychosis? Well, newsflash, guys, we already knew that. We're not the ones that say when you join our group it makes you morally superior to everyone else. That was you were thinking of. Of fucking course atheists can also be violent, but I feel more obligated to condemn this act as a person that bitches about bad parking than I do as an atheist. And yet nowhere could I find an op-ed urging comedians that complain about how people park to tone down their rhetoric. So why do we know that the killer was an atheist? Why must every news agency have to devote some amount of ink to the what if he killed him because he hates religion so much angle? Again, no evidence, pure speculation, but shucks, what if? Wouldn't that just fit right into our tidy little narrative about how everybody's just as bad as everybody else? Wouldn't it be nice if we had that story that showed that everybody killed over their beliefs? It's not just a religious thing? Wouldn't it just put a cherry on the top of our culturally relativistic mantra about how all the groups are equally bad? After all, it's more important to be fair than accurate, isn't it? And meanwhile, the media is getting all introspective about whether they're treating the Muslims with a double standard here. And again, I'm not trying to minimize this, but if the victims weren't Muslim, if the same dude gunned down 3 Christians in that parking lot, we probably wouldn't know about it if we didn't live nearby. And if he'd killed 3 black Christians, we might not even know about it then. Again, not trying to minimize. I'm trying to put this in perspective. And in order to do so, I'd like to point to another of the 35 or so murders that took place in this country on February 10th of 2015. This one happened in New Orleans at about 1:30 a.m. The victim's name was Penny Proud, and she was the 5th young black trans woman to be gunned down in the streets of New Orleans in the past 6 weeks. She was also the 5th to be all but ignored by the mainstream media. There is plenty of very real and very deadly bigotry in this world. We don't need to speculate about where it might be when we have so many ready examples of where it is.